Greetings, dear listener. You're listening to the Jaunty Mantis podcast. This is Jesse,
This is Maddie.
and we are presenting to you today a special bonus episode.
True
Why?
story.
Yeah, why do we do these?
Well, the Jaunty Mantis is released in seasons, 12 episodes per. And the reason for that is so we have time to take a breather, get extra recordings done, make sure we don't fall behind. So if you're listening to this, that means that we're in between seasons.
We made it.
So we'll be back soon. And until then, enjoy this episode, this bonus episode. It's not necessarily about role playing game topics, but it is very nerd adjacent.
And we hope you enjoy it.
Yep. All right, welcome to the Jaunty Mantis. Why do I start this with all right, welcome? That's really weird. My name is Maddie. This is my co-host Jesse.
Howdy.
This is the Jaunty Mantis podcast. I just realized I start every intro with all right. That's kind of weird, isn't it? That doesn't
Especially
matter.
because we've been talking for like 20 minutes at this
I know,
point.
it's just my weird thing. Wow, we're off to a great start, folks. This is a tabletop role-playing game podcast where we ask creative questions for curious gamers. We are those curious gamers, and we enjoy talking about the minutia of gaming, the thought process, the conceptual, the creative, the weird aspects of our hobby that make it unique compared to pretty much anything else you can do with your time as far as humans are concerned. And Jesse, what is our topic for today? What's our question?
My question is, now that you have gotten your feet wet, what do you think about riffs?
So, to preface for the audience, Jesse brought riffs back into the mix for himself. Um, this has been something that's been brought up on the podcast, I think, a couple of times. I don't know if we've aired all of those episodes, but how did this start, Jesse? Let's start with that.
Um, I I forget it. It was I think it was a podcast or so. Okay, I got it. Here's the
Mhm.
origin. I remember now. The Strange Series of Event. Uh, Cam Banks, I think, is the guy's name on Twitter. He's a game designer. Posted new campaign idea. It's Palladium Fantasy, but every time your character dies, you get to pick one new character class from any of the Palladium or Rifts books that are out there to be your replacement character.
And how many riffs books are there?
On my shelf right now, I've got like nine, but I think there's something like 37 world books.
37 in a row? Ugh.
I can't help but make that joke every time someone says 37.
It's
I
just,
just say 37
yeah.
and then resist the urge to say, try not to suck any more dick on the way to the parking lot. Hey, where are you going? Um, so yeah, like 12, 15 source books or dimension books.
hmm
Um,
Yeah, and listener, if you're thinking like, oh, like splat books, right? Like third edition Dungeons and Dragons, or extra books from fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, or any other role-playing game. Imagine that, but then in any one of these books, the character class could be completely fucking broken or unplayable or both.
and
So
that's where the real fun is.
So that was the genesis of the idea. Now, is this going to be like a full scale game, or is this just like a couple of sessions? Is this a one off kind of adventure?
No, I want to go. I want to do a campaign. I want to run this thing into the ground.
So the so the concept is if our characters die, then we get to either do we add a class or make a new character of a different class from one of the Rifts books?
So basically, I restricted the core book for Rift's Ultimate Edition, which I think has only like 30 character classes or something in it.
Yeah. They really,
But
it's
don't
really
worry,
lean.
because it's random, it's attributes rolled straight down, and there's attribute requirements. You probably don't qualify for 98% of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Attributes. I want to do an episode at one point called like attributes, who needs them? Because like Rifts is, I haven't played Rift since like we just played game number one, session number one for Jesse's Rifts game after character creation. We did do a session zero. But the last time I played Rifts before that was when I was a teenager. And so we haven't even rolled any serious dice yet. We haven't even had like a combat. Like there's been a couple of things people have done, but it's basically been majority role play up to this
Yep.
point. You
Some
know.
psychic powers, maybe a spell cast or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So, how does the justification for this work? Like how does somebody who is like a cyber doc suddenly become like a glitter boy after they've died? Like how does that like what's the hand waving magic you're gonna do to make that a reality?
Oh, they'll make a new character.
Oh, okay. So it's a brand new character. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
I
brand
see.
new character, and that class is then on the roster for other people to play as well. So, which is, I think, the secret brilliance of this, because if you pick something too good, then someone else can be like, well, I'm going to be one of those my next run too. And then you got two of them, and your thunder gets stolen.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing too is that I think, if you know riffs better than me, listener and Jesse, please forgive me, but it feels like one of the balancing factors behind like a glitter boy is what for the uninitiated, just so they know.
Well, I mean, it's not as cool as a Gigi, also known as a glitter girl from the Free Quebec source book. But yeah, a glitter boy is like the height of pre-cataclysm military technology. It is a 12-foot tall suit of power armor called the glitter boy because it's covered in like chrome, which makes it laser resistant because the lasers bounce off the chrome.
Mm-hmm.
And it has like the single deadliest gun in Rifts
Mm-hmm.
called the boom gun, which has like there's pylons in the feet of this thing that drill into the earth when it fires to keep it from getting knocked over by the recoil. And also, anyone within 200 feet of it is deafened and stunned from the sonic boom of the flechettes fired from it. Um,
Yes.
Even if they're in like environmental protective armor.
Right. And isn't the balancing factor of the glitter boy or playing a dragon or something else in Rifts, isn't the balancing factor is that like if unless you're playing a game where you're just basically marauders or doing combat missions, like you need a vagabond, for instance.
Yeah.
You need like a what are they like a rogue scientist or a rogue scholar because like you have to like it's a post-apocalyptic world, so there's villages and townships or whatever, and it's like if you come rolling in your glitter boy armor, like people are just gonna run away from you. You're not gonna be able to get anything done. Nobody wants to be around that.
Yeah.
you know so we okay, so that like because I could see people wanting to be a glitter boy, but nobody rolled one in our character creation. Nobody chose that in session zero. I didn't even
I
choose
was
it.
really surprised.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we did have one of our guys roll a dragon, but I felt like you kind of let him into that one.
I
I
just
mean,
said, I asked one simple
ultimately,
question. Do you want to play a
ultimately,
human or do you want to play a dragon?
and he said dragon because why wouldn't you? If you don't know anything about riffs, you know, like it's our buddy J5, and this is not a criticism of his choice, but I think it's funny that like without if I didn't know anything about riffs and you were like, hey, do you want to play a human or a dragon? I'd be like, I won't play a dragon. Yeah. But I know I've read this book and I don't have anything against playing a dragon. I have this weird part of my brain that's like, What if I was a cyber doc, which is not what I rolled, but I wanted to, and then you talked me out of that.
Yeah, I think if we had had someone do like a headhunter or a full conversion cyborg and you were wanted to be a cyberdoc, it'd been like great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what did you think of our session zero then? Like what are our characters for this adventure?
So the rules that were laid down in the session zero were basically you guys are good guys. You need to have like a good or the less odious. I can't say neutral because there's that whole essay about there are no neutral alignments. Um, People, if we're neutral, will just stand there and do nothing, which I'm like is a weird reading of neutral. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, so you're all from the same small town or going to be connected to it. Like I said, there is an exception if anyone plays a dragon because you will be a couple days old. Um, and you guys are all good guys. And the campaign premise is there's this cyber knight, Michael Cross. I'm going to say Michael Scott now because of what we were talking about. Michael Cross, who, knowing you wanted to be more than farmers or brewers or people, do something more than just stay in the small town, um, guided you and funded you to strike out on your own with the promise that we'd all meet up 2 years later after, being out in the world to, reconnect and talk about your adventures and figure out what to do next.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we have what are our character classes? What are people playing?
Well, you are, I don't know. I need to start with you. There's Jello Truth, who is a mystic. A mystic is like a spirit sensitive, uh, psychic and also wizard at the same time who can commune with spirits and everything. And the funniest thing about this, so Riffs is so old school. You may remember a comeliness optional trait for how pretty you were, like
Mm-hmm.
charisma's charming, but you could roll that. This has physical beauty, and there are exploding dice. So, like, if you get a 16 or higher on your 3d6 when determining an attribute, wow, that is a sentence to lose people. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
in Riffs, you roll three six-sided dice for each of your attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as what you're saying about attributes, what are they good for?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, unless your attribute is 16 or higher, or like six or lower, nothing. It means not. It's just a number. There's no bonus derived from it. It's just there. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like it's role playing guidance. Like your guy's kind of fast. Um, but if you roll 16 or higher on that 3d6, you get to roll another six-sided dice and add it to it. And so Jello Truth wound up with a physical beauty of 20,
Mm-hmm.
making him probably the single most attractive human being in the tri-state area. And he's this like hippie mystic who likes to grow plants and like commune with spirits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's Jello Truth. And then who's next? Who's the dragon?
Well, Architeuthis is the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
He is a cat's eye dragon hatchling. When he met the party, he was 5 days old, but he already
Mm-hmm.
spoke American and Dragonese at 98% and had knowledge of mathematics and advanced math. And he has wilderness lore and like one other skill. He has no skills other than being a dragon.
Mm-hmm. You can shape change.
Yeah. Turn invisible, fly, breathe fire, regenerate, has psychic powers, will eventually at second level, I think, start casting spells, but no skills.
Mm-hmm. And listener, you could play that dragon, or you could play a scientist, a rogue scientist. We have a vagabond. What's his character's names? What's Kurt's character? Walton
Uh,
Goggins?
Brock.
Brock, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vagabond
Brock
Brock.
Morgan.
He's very valuable because he has a car.
Yeah, he has the Buick Mobile, we're calling it, or something like that.
Yeah, he has a car. That's that's one of the things he brings to the table, and he's really good at tidying up too.
Yeah, he's got a lot of skill, domestic skills, cooking, cleaning.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the characters in the party is a shape-shifting dragon who can turn invisible and breathe fire, and the other one is a guy with a car who has domestic skills.
breathes fire that can melt through a tank hole. Let's not
Mhm.
forget that part of it.
I apologize.
Yeah, but Brock, he's got the car and he can eyeball a fella. That's the name of the one class ability, which is
Hmm.
like to just look at somebody and read him because he's been around, seen things, seen some
Right.
shit.
In that small town in
Hmm.
Nowheresville, Indiana.
Hmm. Well, he traveled for 2 years, saw
Sure.
some shit in
Sure.
his beat up old car.
Yep. So did the rest of us, though. But
And then
okay.
there's Mr. Best,
Hmm. Yes. Jacob's best.
Jacob's Best.
Yes.
He's
And
a
he's
burster,
what's a burster?
a pyrokinetic psychic.
Right. Yeah. And then there's my character, Panther Seabass Dudikoff, who's a juicer. Who
What's a juicer, Matt?
A juicer is someone who has sold their body and their future to being implemented with cyberware that releases steroids and chemicals into their body to physically augment them.
Peak male enhancement.
Yeah. It is the ultimate juvenile power fantasy until you see that there are glitter boys and dragons. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Nobody
he's a
picked a
juicer.
crazy, and I'm so glad.
I don't know why you would play a crazy. What's the like a juicer is somebody you can wrap your head or well, look, we're mixing metaphors here, but I can understand a juicer. I don't have a crazy doesn't work for me. A crazy is basically a juicer with mind augmentation, right?
Yeah, they got the mind over matter or mom implants. They've all got a mom problem.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
clumsy use of that joke, unlike Velvet Generation, which the Ministry of Music being mom saying no rock and roll. That's clever. No, yeah, you get all the stuff a juicer can do, but you're not going to die in 6 years.
Yeah, but it's more fun if you're gonna die in 6 years. When I was trying to choose my character, I went to my girlfriend and I said, "Help me decide which character I should play." And she said, "Okay." And I said, "First option is a juicer," and I explained what that was. And then I was like, "The other one is a rogue scholar, and then the other one is the cyber doc." And she was like, "What's the downside of the juicer?" I'm like, "Oh, he's gonna die in 6 years." And she's like, "Perfect." And she's never played a role playing game in her life. And I was like, actually, right, you're right. That is perfect. Like, we don't play games with we don't play. I mean, maybe you do, but I don't play role playing games with the idea that my character is going to be around in 6 years. You know, it's not like somebody's like, "Hey, I got this great idea for a game, and it's going to span eons. It's going to span generations." So your character needs to be around, for their children.
Well, I'm just waiting when I can put a temporal wizard in as a bad guy. So,
Yeah, and he's like, "Hey, your 6 years are up." And I'm
hey,
like,
guess
cool.
what?
I'm gonna come
You're
back as a
4 years
cyber doc.
older.
I'll come back as a cyber doc then. A cyber doc with nobody to fix. It's the perfect me character. Useless, sort of interesting.
Highly skilled, very diverse toolkit.
Yes,
Nothing to use it on.
right. That's
Ah,
that's that is how I make characters in a nutshell. Yeah. Yeah. So we made these characters. We did a session zero. Somebody needs to go into that Riffs book with a hatchet.
it's very well indexed.
It's a great
Like
game. It's just so poorly written.
here's like this is the thing I learned that like when they started creating like AD&D second edition, I wish I could remember the designer who did this. But like basically this guy went through the first edition player's handbook and the first edition dungeon master's guide, like multiple copies, and like cut everything out by hand. like
Wow.
because it was the early 80s, like cut everything out by hand, like so we could get every block of text and then arranged it in a way that made sense. Because if you ever read like the first edition Gary Gygax's like thought vomit on a typewriter, the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. It's like, here's a table for possible herbalists that might be in a village and what they may have for sale. Here's poison in an entirely different part of the book. Here's some rules for running a mass combat underwater. But here in another section, like
Hmm.
no one has ever had the chutzpah to say to Mr. Simbiida, uh, Kevin, about how the book's laid out. I mean, it doesn't seem like that. Probably because his wife, Marianne, does the layout and
Hmm.
the typography. It's like, oh, she's just so nice. I don't want to upset Marianne, but like,
No, I actually don't have that big of a problem with the layout and the typography. My issue with Rifts is that like it's in serious need of like refinement and revision. And it seems like, I mean, like I've got the Ultimate Edition. That's the one we're using. So obviously there has been some revision.
yeah, this is the first pass of revision.
Yeah, and it is very Gygaxian, this book, in that like it just comes from that generation of gamers that didn't have everything handed to them. You know what I mean? Like that's before us. Like we're at that grognard level. The crusty. Then there's that crusty old gamer above us, the ultimate grognards, I guess. Um, but like that generation didn't have resources the way that we do now. They had to make everything themselves. And if you read anything about Rifts, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way that game was essentially designed is like um he was like part of a massive gaming group or a gaming club,
Yeah, the
lots of
Detroit
people.
something like
Yeah, like an organization that met up, regularly, played games, talked about games, and everybody had the latest books. And they had, guess what? They had the same problems we have today, where a new thing would come out and they would have difficult time convincing their players to play the new thing. And so, as best as I can parse in the short amount of time, I did a little bit of research on Rifts now that I'm an adult. He was trying to create a game where anything would fit into it. It's an extremely ambitious and powerful project, and it's a good game. You'll get no argument out of me on that. It's just I'm looking at something and I'm like, man, this would be a huge contender more than it is, uh, with like several revisions for, rules, clarity, simplicity, you know. But it is what it is, you know. It's like,
yeah, I like the weird thing is, and I think a lot of people that are Riffs fans would say this, I don't know if you did that, you would lose some of the charm,
you would. You
lose
totally would.
some of the weirdness that makes Rifts cool, like the Rifts Savage Worlds edition, like ported into Savage Worlds, and now it's pulpy. And Savage Worlds was designed as a miniature combat game, and you can sort of
Hmm.
see that really clearly whenever you play. It just doesn't feel, it doesn't hit the same. Like
Yeah.
it's not, I hate to say this, it's weird, but the idea of Rifts in my head, it's not just a setting.
Hmm.
I would not want to run this setting in another system because it wouldn't be Rifts.
Right.
There's a sort of bootstrappy, do it yourself mentality. Like the really awkward 2000s zine thing to say was like, there's a punk rock DIY. Like, I
Hmm.
don't know. Um, and it's giving me license, like, uh, to just do stuff. So there was like, for example, there was a scene where the commune with spirits power. The mystic wanted to use that to get information. And I'm like, well, there's no spirit here that has information, but they're using the power. So we'll just do it for a little colorful setting thing. And so I had him like see a ghost. Um, that was all improv because it's riffs and there are no
Hmm.
rules. And I'm like, what do
Hmm.
ghosts do? Well, I'll look it up later. They're not going to fight the ghost, I don't think.
Right.
And it
Yeah,
was
that
just fun. And I don't know that I would have necessarily been able to do that in a thing that wasn't riffs. I would have thought, what's the encounter? What, like, there's the stat block for spirits and blah blah blah. So I'm just
yeah.
like, hey, lean
Yeah,
into the
I
narrative
don't
turn.
disagree with it. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think you're exactly right when you're saying like that's what makes riffs riffs. Like you and I have said a couple of times on this podcast that a role-playing game is more than just the way it's played. There's more to it than that. There's more to the specialness of a game than just the rules and the way that people are implementing and interacting with those rules. But what I my only pushback to that would be like you can do revisions on riffs and still keep the original version and play the version you want to play, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
Like I couldn't be less interested in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but it still has a major place in my gaming cadence or my schedule because they've refined it and revised it and kept it the world's most popular role-playing game, and it's the game that people want to play. You know what I mean? And if I wanted to go back and play 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, I could. You know, that's the one I enjoyed the most. That's the one I like sinking my teeth into. The D20 system is very appealing to me, but that's not the system we play. We play 5th edition when people want to play D&D. You know what I mean? So I can see your point. Like if you do revisions of riffs, you're going to end up with a version of it that may eclipse the original, and then you're worried about losing what the magic is. But I would argue that the magic is the way that people love this game and talk about it, and
Yeah, there's
that's what makes it
like
special.
it might be just pure nostalgia. It's probably a lot of it's pure nostalgia, but like the amount of time I spent in study hall or classes, like tracing the covers of Riffs books or reading the OCC descriptions, like as a teenager or preteen, I guess early teen when I was super into it. But I never really played that much.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I couldn't necessarily. This is the weird thing I'm discovering coming back to it. I can get that same vibe the moment I pop open a book and just start reading an OCC description. But like now I'm not just skipping to the equipment and seeing if there's a cool power. Like
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, what's the skill profile on this? What is the equipment? What would be a cool story to tell with a guy that does these things? Like, and I'm like, oh, there is actually some kind of balance in here.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane, but it's there. But it's the thing that I like, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and call Rifts an OSR game. It's the thing I like about the OSR.
Yeah.
It, just like the story games I like, has a fiction first attitude inherent to it.
Right. Right.
Because ruling's not rules. There's not going to be a rule to cover everything. So the story's not going to be guided. The story's going to be guided by a rule. It's going to be guided by what makes sense in the story. And you're going to have to come up with that on the fly. And I like practicing those chops, which is why the mystic talked to the ghost of a woman who was putting her like groceries in her car the moment before the apocalypse hit
Right.
on Christmas Eve 2098.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And I could see the OSR example. I would stretch it farther to say that like Rifts is like a complex multi-causal uh, system of OSR. Like OSR to me is also about simplicity. And that is kind of the paradox of Rifts. Like it is very OSR, but there's so much over complexity in order to handle all of these different things. You know what I mean? It's almost like, and I realize, this pun is intended, or this joke is intended. It's a multiverse version of OSR.
Megaverse.
Yeah, megaverse. That's a better way to put it. Yes. Riffs is the megaverse OSR.
I think one of the things too, and you know that OSR reading has been more my jam. Like I think there's a distinction within the OSR of like there's old school games just defined as playing games that feel old, like the way they did back in the 70s and 80s, which Rifts certainly does.
Yeah.
But I think the simplicity thing is more in line with people that are into the B/X, the basic expert, like
Hmm.
Moldvay D&D.
Hmm.
That's the simplicity. That's a whole subgenre. That's that's the gloom core, if you will, to the goth rock of that is
Right.
the OSR. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, there's also like Osric, which is a reordering of first edition AD&D. Like
Interesting.
that is also OSR. So
Hmm. The appeal of OSR is like, don't overthink it. We
yeah,
don't. I think that going back to our, original set of episodes in season one, I think that there's a part of the way that they're making fifth edition where they're trying to communicate to their audience, like, stop overthinking it. It doesn't need to be this complex. Um, and so, obviously fifth edition D&D is not OSR, but I think that that's a huge step in gaming because this was a hobby that was pretty much controlled by people who reveled in complexity or at least were willing to tolerate the madness of it. And it's like you're not going to grow a new audience if there's all these mountains to climb, if there's all these like obstacles in the way, you know. And so my fear is that Rifts at some point is just going to end up in a museum, basically, because things are getting simpler and more straightforward and more accessible in gaming. And maybe that's just a trend. I don't know. But I see a really cool game that can be revised into a more palatable format. And yeah, you would lose some, but not all of what makes it great. And for those grognards who like us who want to play the original craziness, it can always be there.
yeah, I think actually literally like pass one just indexing the book, like having us like putting chapter. Okay, here's the thing that I've been thinking of since you said that comment about like you think a book, it's a splat book. There are no chapters in Rift
Hmm.
books. Like it is like they are talking about one thing, and now here is another thing they are talking about. There's
Hmm.
no header, there is no visual thing to let you. There might be a line. Um, like I'm gonna just pull a Riffs book off my shelf. This is Riffs World Book 14, New West, which came out in 1997. So the game had been out. Whoa, this is book 14. The game had been out for 4 years, I think. So if you open it up, there is a table of contents that has categories such as contents, New West overview of territories, the first apocalyptic cavalry, Arizona, the Golden Ones, Cloud Magic, Colorado, the Colorado Baronies, rodeos, resolving rodeo events and medicine shows,
Hmm.
new skills for cowboys, OCC's like they're bolded and I can't see in the picture. They're bolded in the table of contents, but when you actually open the book, it's just like there's lines in a bar and an introduction, and like there's no chapter dividers. There's nothing that tells the eye. So break it up into chapters. Maybe do a clarifying pass on character creation.
Hmm.
Maybe lead the book with that. I don't know. Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
because the thing is, if it was laid out simply, Riffs is not actually complex.
No, it's not. It's a mess. That's the problem. It's pretty simple and straightforward once you figure it out, but and that's what I'm saying is like Rifts has the potential to go beyond just being a like this is going to sound weird to say because I'm sure there are people that be like it's one of the greatest role-playing games of all time. Like it's one of the pillars of the hobby. You know what I mean? But I think it could be something so much more, you know. Um, but it's
What
like
are
I've
you
barely played it, so take
what are
that
you
for what it's
excited
worth.
about to have happen or to see in the campaign?
What am I excited about to see in the campaign? I'm excited to see the world through this lens. You know, I've always liked the post-apocalyptic Rifts aesthetic. I've always liked the coalition aesthetic. The way that things are like the in Rifts, the way that things are just familiar enough for you to have touchstones to be able to like process it, but then are just so crazy batshit weird. Um, you know, that's one of the things I love about Shadowrun as well. But like, there with Rifts, it's like you're looking the original book, I just used to like love looking at the pictures
Yeah.
before I even like made a character because it was just like this is so cool. Like this is such a great adaptation of these elements that we all know like stuff we've been saying on this podcast about like using elements of what we have in popular culture in order to help communicate what your ideas are in the game. Like that's what Rifts is doing. It's taking these ideas that are out there in popular culture and it's using that as a creative language to communicate this like vast multi megaverse, which is a difficult concept. Like in a lot of games where you have the options to go anywhere and do almost anything, you freeze, So I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm excited to do stuff at the base level, and I'm excited for to see how weird things can get. So,
I got plans. And I will say this from just, reading these books for fun, because, I've been picking them up. And I've been picking them up new. You can find them at half price, like all the time.
hmm
But I've been buying them new from Palladium because, hey, keep doing the work, you know? Um, like just reading them, I get little ideas in a way that I don't with other books where I'm mostly just reading the rules.
hmm
And there is so much fluff just scattered throughout. Like there's this area, I think it's what used to be New Mexico called the Waste. Because like when the rifts went off, apparently the Yellowstone mega volcano went off. A thing I missed as a teenager and didn't know about.
Sure.
But like so everything got covered in like 40 feet of ash. And so like just downwind from that in the south, uh like there's this area of New Mexico that's this volcanic plain, and like if you it's full of horrible dust and lightning storms and ley line storms and magical energy and all this shit. And like there's just like areas where you'll be walking through and there's a group of ghosts singing Christmas carols, like
hmm
because there used to be a town there or something, like, and I'm like, oh, I'm stealing that, and then I did like.
hmm Yeah. Riffs goes against everything we say on this podcast. We say like you don't have to write a Bible, you don't have to explore, every inch of your world. You don't have to get overcomplicated. And Riffs is like, hold my beer. You know what I mean? And there's exceptions to everything. And if you're gonna make a cult classic role-playing game, then by all means throw everything you can into it, I guess. So yeah,
Yeah.
what are you excited? What are you excited to see in your own Rifts game? Like now that you have an idea of what people are playing and how they're gonna play it.
Oh, I'm excited to kill one of y'all. um no, I'm kidding.
It's
That's
fine
gonna
with me.
happen. Like I'm not
hmm
excited about it, but it's like it will. Combat is lethal. It will happen. Someone is gonna pick a fight
hmm
that they shouldn't have picked,
Yeah.
and I will
Can
try. I will telegraph that, and it'll still get picked. And there are. This is not 5e. This
right. Yeah.
like I might be surprised, just like the way I always am when shit gets bad in 5e, and be like, oh, actually, there is an inherent sort of tuning, and like they pulled through. Except a mega damage weapon against someone whose armor's been blown off is like a no, you're
hmm
dead. Like
hmm
half your body is vaporized. Like,
Yeah, and the people who love Rifts, this is an aspect of it that they like. That's a problem with fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons There's healer classes, but you don't need them,
No.
so they're pointless essentially. They're sacred cows of this game, that used to have an element of lethality to it to the point where they had to make the cleric and the druid so fucking powerful just to entice people to actually play them. Like there's an element of lethality to Rifts that is part of what people who love this game will cite it every time if you ask them what they love about it. It's because that can be a reality of playing in that world. D&D in 5th edition especially just keeps putting on pairs of kids gloves onto the characters over and over and over and over again. I'm not saying your characters can't die, but it's very, very heavily favored for you to not. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Yeah, very
sure it
often your
happens.
characters can't even drop. Like,
I mean, you get multiple death saving throws for Christ's sake, which is fucking ridiculous. Like, one of my favorite 5e books is the Runehammer Games 5e hardcore mode, you know? And I was running the rules out of that and I still didn't kill you guys in a grim dark gritty 5e hardcore game. I still didn't even kill the player characters in that. You know
well,
what I mean?
this is a tangent, but you ever seen somebody roll a 20 or a 1 on a death save? Because that is kind of a fun play moment.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I've ever seen that, but
I've seen
death
somebody
save.
roll a 1.
So if people die in a 5e game, you probably feel bad, right?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's just such, it seems like such an improbable confluence of chances, of
Hmm.
circumstance that led to the death of that player character.
And it's a game system that coddles its players. That's one of the other problems with modern Dungeons and Dragons is its player coddling. And I
Now
and
we're grognards. Now it's official.
oh yeah, I know I'm a grognard. Like, look, I listen to other episodes of this podcast. You'll hear me talk very positively about D&D. Like, nothing in my life is an absolute. I don't know why anybody else's life is, but like nothing in my life goes completely one way, like I like and dislike so many different things of everything. I wallow in complexity and nuance, unfortunately. I wish I could be like, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is the worst thing ever, fuck it, or Dungeons and Dragons is the best thing ever, it's sacred. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not. It's really good and it's also really bad. Like it's both of those things. And you can have fun playing it, you know? So that's one of the issues with D&D is it coddles its players. The whole system
Rifts
does.
don't.
Rifts don't. Exactly. If you make a Rifts character, you should know what you're getting into. And so I hope you don't apologize or feel bad when one of us in this Rifts game dies. I hope you don't have to make the excuse of being like, well, that's Rifts. Like you should just when somebody dies, you should just be completely quiet and just,
No, I'm leaning in with graphic description.
yeah.
Like when you get ripped apart by a demon, like you get ripped apart by a demon. Like
Yeah. No, I'm not saying to minimize the description. I'm saying after it's happened and it's done. That's one of the things I hate the most about our hobby is when a player character dies and the DM goes, "Oh, I feel bad. I'm sorry." And it's like, "What are you apologizing for?" If we're playing Mortal Kombat or a fighting game or whatever, you don't apologize to the other person if you win. Like, who gives a shit? It's a fucking role playing game. Like, have fun. People get really attached to their characters, I guess, to the point where that becomes a huge issue because they invested so much in them. And that's awesome. I wish I could do that, but I can't. So I guess there's a side of me that's jealous of it, but there's also a side of me that's like, come on, it's
I
make
just got
believe.
too many good ideas.
It's the Jesse excuse. I'm too awesome to be bogged down by this.
I mean, with this haircut and beard trim, I got too many good character ideas. Yeah, it sucks, but I'll just come back with something worse.
Yeah, and I make terrible characters, so like I can't get too attached.
I get more attached to your characters than you do.
That's so true. That's so true. All right.
Like
Well,
I'm a number one dubbed stan over here. Like
I miss dubbed. You know, dubbed, to describe a character, when I first started playing with this particular group, one of our games involved a 5e group where it was stylized as the Freak Force. And so I decided to make like they were like, not your typical array of human, dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling, or whatever. It was like a warlock, warforged, a tiefling, uh, you know, I don't remember what all there was like an underdark gnome of some sort, I think.
yeah, Svirfneblin cleric,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
tiefling multi-class warlock rogue,
Hmm.
a warforged warlock.
Yeah. And when I heard what the composition of the group was, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a goblin monk, and his name is gonna be Dupt. And it's the kind of group where in this world you see these guys walking down the road, and you're like, what the fuck is this? It's like, you know what I mean? Uh, so yeah, Dupt was a great character. He's very wise, but also very stupid. So we had some great fun with that character. I miss him. I really enjoyed playing as a goblin monk. Like,
Well,
uh,
February we'll be back.
I hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so. Well,
Um,
dear listener, if you have a character that you fell in love with and you lost them in a horrible gaming experience in which your character died and you were in love with them and you would really like to tell us that story, don't.
or do.
But keep it brief. And how could they do that, Jesse?
Well, they could email us at jauntymantis@gmail.com.
Hmm.
Or they could reach out through the hex
Everybody
at
else is calling it Twitter. I don't know why you insist on calling it Hex.
because I try to pronounce a single X, and one day I'll
Okay,
get it right and I'll summon
fair
a
enough.
demon. Um, yeah, at Wanty Mantis because I spelled it wrong when I set up the account.
Yep. And we're not changing it.
Nope, there's no
Yep.
way to. Like I can change the like screen name, but I can't actually change the at. Yeah, so
It's part of the lore of the show. And Jesse, if what is our catchphrase? How do we end this show?
get out there and play some fucking games or shit.
Yeah.